Hey, guys. Altovise here, host of the Speakeasy podcast, as well as the Unmuted Intelligence podcast. Guys, this is the official launch. Burr, 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 burr. I am so excited to come and bring my very first guest to you guys. Listen, let's just be honest. When this all came about, deciding to do the Unmuted Intelligence podcast, it was because I saw that things had changed. Opportunities opened up, other opportunities closed and shut down and dried up. And people needed um, they needed some help, some support, some encouragement, but they needed more than just words. They needed to actually see the people and some of the things that you are now trying to do. And so with that being said, I'm excited about my guest for today. Man, on this journey as an entrepreneur, as an introvert, it's been a blessing for me because I've been able to connect with such amazing people globally. And my guest for today is one of those people. So I want to say hello, Glenn. How are you?
Doing great, Altovise. Thank you for having me here.
Uh-oh. There we go.
So anyway, repeat. Doing great, Altovise.
Hey, Glenn. How are you?
Great.
Good. So I'm excited to have you as a guest. But before we get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I was a police officer and a detective for 26 years. And during that time, I experienced a whole lot of things like most officers do that were traumatic and heartbreaking. And if I share any of those, I'll cry, but I may. We'll see what happens. Anyway, I shut down. I got PTSD, ended up divorced because I quit talking. And I'm a slow learner, so I tried it again and got divorced again. But after that divorce, stayed up in my cabin for 3 years, pretty much by myself. And I learned a lot about myself. I got to look at the fact that there were things I could blame on the ex-wives, but I was the common factor. So what did I contribute? And I looked at that and I changed me. And as I changed me, I came to the conclusion that I know a little bit about trauma and I know a little bit about working through it now. And so I created a program to travel around and I wrote that for police officers, but I found out everybody has trauma in their life. It's for anybody. So now I travel and I teach police officers and anybody who will listen about how dealing with trauma, how to open up communication and help prevent PTSD, help reduce divorce, help reduce suicide by following some of the things or using some of the tools that I provide. And I even wrote a book about it. And that book came out in December. So,
And that is bridging the gap.
Yeah, right there.
I love it. And it's interesting because we're in a time where I think for the longest time, the actual gap in society, the gap in relationships, the gap in mental health, it's been hidden or overlooked.
Ignored.
Good word.
Yeah. And a lot of times we ignored ourselves because I thought, I don't need anybody's help. I can take care of it. And boy, I was wrong. So with help and things, and I can now do that. And I have a wonderful relationship with a beautiful lady now because I changed.
Ooh, that's major too. When we think about bridging the gap, we're looking at the gap from different perspectives. So how we see the gap may not even be how somebody else sees it, but it's still a gap that needs to be filled, or else we're going to fall into it.
Absolutely. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same over and over with the same result. So we get to shift the way we look at things. And that's one of the things I did was I started looking outside the box. We as people put these little limits on ourselves. And I started trying things that I'd never heard of, things that back in the day when I looked at, like, have you ever heard of a drum circle? Okay. Back in the day, a drum circle to me meant a bunch of hippies and druggies going out pounding their drums around a fire. And that's what it kind of was. But now there are actually people who are shamans, Native American shamans, and they do a healing drum circle. And so it's a whole different energy and a whole different look. You're talking about perspectives. That's a whole different perspective from the original drum circle I knew.
Oh my goodness. And that's interesting too, because even on a broader spectrum for that, when we think about the healing that we need, we can't always find it in our comfort zone.
Oh boy. So let's get rid of that comfort zone and stretch that baby. Have you ever heard of Tibetan bowls or singing bowls? Yeah, those are amazing and very healing and similar to the drums. That's another thing I tried. In fact, I actually kind of zoned in on one session when I was having a healing session, and I saw these red rocks. 2 years later, those red rocks were in my backyard of my new house. I had never been there before, but when I saw that lot, I saw those rocks. I knew that's where I needed to be.
It's funny that and those of you who are coming in, I see you guys coming in. I appreciate you guys. Welcome to the Unmuted Intelligence Podcast. This is the very first episode, my very first guest for the podcast. And, when we think about bridging the gap, bridging the gap is valuable because we're in a time right now where we're actually bridging the gaps from our ancestors. Like, we're bridging the gaps from great grandparents and great great grandparents and the things that they were dealing with. We are still dealing with some of those same things. And those are the actual gaps that we're fulfilling. That we're filling up. But we also have to understand that for many, the gaps from our grandparents and great grandparents were secrets. Like, we talk about, they talk about, how much the divorce rate has risen over the years. But what we don't talk about is that our great grandparents stayed together, but slept in separate beds and separate rooms.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't even thought of that one, but it's true. And, we create the gaps ourselves. So how do we fix it? We fix ourselves. And that's one thing about self-accountability. And I'm not sure our great grandparents had the tools at that time to do that.
I'm glad you used that word, tools.
No, they were, taught like I was, and I've overcome some of the things I was taught. I can take care of myself. I don't need anybody's help. I'm standalone. I'm a guy. I can do whatever I want. And that's, I can take care of it. And I get to make myself a little more vulnerable. And for us to bridge those gaps, that's what we have to do, is to make ourselves vulnerable. And that's not a negative term, but we get to be open. Guys, show some emotion, maybe. It's okay. I share stories in my book and I cry, and I'll cry in front of 30 or 40 people. And guess what? It's okay, because that's how I'm feeling.
I'm glad you said that. It was interesting. The very first book that I published was titled "It's Okay to Cry," and I struggled with the title of the book. I struggled with, like, why would anybody want to buy a book that's called "It's Okay to Cry"? But I realized that was something that was really taught, that we weren't supposed to cry. You're supposed to pull yourself up by your own bootstrap, get over it, move on. And we weren't taught to deal with the here and now. We're taught to just keep pushing forward, and you'll get past it by some means. You'll get past it.
Yeah. Well, that's like when I was in athletics. If you were hurt, you hit it, and you didn't let the opponent know, because they would use that as a weakness against you. And so you hid everything. And the same thing, we learned that with our feelings and our emotions back I hate to say back in the day, but back in the day. And yeah, so, my wife now says I'm a little too open because I have no secrets. I don't want secrets. And guess what? It works much better, just open, honest. And that's one reason she and I have such a great relationship, because there are absolutely no secrets.
So let's talk about this book, Bridging the Gap.
Sure.
And you talk about that transparency, that openness and honestness and honesty. When when you looked at the final project, when it was in your hand, who was one person that you wish you could put it in their hand and that they would read it?
Oh, wow. Great question. I'll be honest, I wrote it for police officers. And I actually changed the title after especially going through COVID and working at a hospital. I saw so many people being traumatized. And so everybody has trauma in their life. So I have some friends that were police officers that are starting to retire, and I'm hoping they will pick my book up. But anybody that has some trauma in their life, these stories are all police, because that's what I was. But the solutions work for anybody. So if you want some great um, stories about things that happen to officers, but you want some great solutions that you can apply in your life, the trauma, it's basically for anybody.
Like that, because yeah, when we think about and working with women that have been through like domestic violence and um, different things, divorce and homelessness and things of those natures, like there are so many things that we carry even when we feel like we've healed from the situation. There's still so much baggage that we carry from that experience itself, that it does become damaging to the next relationship, the next job, because you can have trauma from a job and then you bring it into the next one. To even when we're how we handle and interact with our children, and with just people in general, other businesses, other people in the neighborhood. And so I love that we've become a society that's moved a whole lot more in the direction of seeing that trauma is
Yeah.
an actual thing that is hurting us as a nation, as a world, as individuals, as families. And I have to say this: Generation Z, man, they're not holding back with saying, I'm not going to deal with that.
And good for them, because there's so many situations in the past there I look back and think, oh, why didn't I? Because that's just, you just didn't do that back then. You just didn't do that. Well, guess what? Now they are. And that's one reason the older generation is having a hard time with Generation Z, because they're so opposite, because many people haven't learned that yet. Many of the older people, I should say. And Generation Z, on the other hand, hasn't recognized that those old guys are different than us. They recognize that, but they haven't recognized, what do I do to bridge that gap that's created there by the difference in perspectives. And it's a two-way street.
Oh, it so is. I love that you said that, because when we look at it, it is. There's things that we can learn from older generations. There's things that older generations can learn from the younger generations. And as we learn, we're able to go ahead and build something stronger
Yep,
than what we had before.
absolutely. And it's like, how do you change the world? One person at a time.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Oh, my goodness. For those of you who are listening in right now, this is the Unmuted Intelligence podcast, and I have my guest, Glen, on, who is the author of Bridging the Gap. Guys, you're going to want to make sure that you get a copy of this book. Listen, I know that we've put on this mask and we've put on this whole idea and this whole, I almost see it like we put on the iron masks, the Iron Man mask and suit in order for us to be able to engage in everyday life. And we don't have to do that.
No, just go out and be you. And that is the beauty of the world we live in, is we can go out and be us, non-judgmental, and just enjoy relationships. That's what I love to do now.
Ooh, I love that. Oh my goodness. So you guys, I have to say this, and I know that especially when it comes to uh different high intense jobs, man, some of the things that you guys endure, other people will never know. People that are in the armed forces and in the service, and people that, like, there are so many things, there are so many factors, but that's how individually each of us are. There's so many things we don't know what the person sitting next to us. We could even be sitting in a church and the person sitting next to us, we don't know what it is that they're enduring
Yep.
or what they've been through. And so, what would you say to anyone who's saying, okay, well, what's the first step in being a little more transparent about my journey or engaging with somebody else about theirs?
First off, be empathetic and realize that they have their own problems just as you have yours. Be non-judgmental. I mean, I, I don't care who you are, what you are. I'm looking at you as a person. And as a person, if you're hurting, I want to help with that. Not hurt you, but solve that. And that is the key. They say walk a mile in their shoes. Well, that's not always possible, but we can mentally shift that so that we can empathize with, because there's so many people I have no idea what their background is. I have no idea what their lifestyle is. I have no idea anything about their family or anything. So how do I work with that? I go in and I'm open and honest and come from the heart, get out of the staying head, because that tells you all the things that don't work, but come from the heart and just talk with people and be open and honest yourself, because then that will be, people will be open and honest back, I hope.
And it's all about building something better. Guys, many of you, like, I get, especially from the Speakeasy podcast, those who listen in to us over here on Amazon, Empowered and Unmuted Community, and then, those that I connect with online, I'm always hearing these different statements that are kind of self-damaging sometimes, right? And it's because of what we've been through. What would you say to someone who, you're looking at someone and that's what they're doing? You see them and they're always talking down to themselves, so they can't come forward and be that confident, bold person because they're always counteracting that with the words that they're saying. What would you say to someone that, they look, and that may be their spouse, that may be their child, that may be their friend, and they're like, I want to help them?
Wow. Let me share a quick story. I wrote my book and I submitted it to a publisher and they accepted my book. All I had to do was submission paperwork, which is about 15 pages. That's easy. I just wrote a 230-page book. And I got to the last 2 pages, which were endorsements, and they wanted 3. I only had 2. And my mind started going, oh, it's not ready. It's not ready. And this was in March. And I sat on it and sat on it and let the internal fear stew. And finally, one day in November, I woke up and I said, I used a tool that I learned called the countdown, because it takes about 5 seconds for your mind to come up with an objection. I said, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. I went to my laptop. I took 20 minutes, typed up the pages, submitted them to the publisher. And a week later, I was accepted and they took my book. And internal fear is horrendously. So back to the question, now I kind of got sidetracked. What would I say to somebody? First off, and I don't know if you're religious or not, I don't care. You're a child of God. And just as you have a child of you,
Oh, I love that. The humble brag. It's interesting because over time, because of my experience with seeing some people that kind of like bragged in order to make themselves seem like they were in a certain level and things like that. And we know the whole Instagram lifestyle. It was like, man, I didn't talk about anything that I was doing. I didn't talk about the awards. I didn't talk about the education. I didn't talk about it. I just kept a lot of things under wraps. And it was interesting. I was on an accountability call and they, we were talking about it and I was like, well, I said, I have the receipts. I have people that, thank me for being this amazing person, but I just don't share that. And so I read them an email that I had received from a professor at Georgetown who was just like, I credit you with helping me to become unmuted and to move forward in this area and be able to help other people in this area. And it was like, and they were like, are you serious? Like that's major. I'm like, but I don't share those type of things out because it's that backlash of there are so many people who are sharing stuff and it's just to be able to seem like they're at a certain level. So I definitely over the last 6 months or so had to really work on my mindset and saying, no, I'm showing them my value. That's so significant too. I know we hear different people, like we hear the Tyler Perrys talk about build your own table, and we hear about everybody talk about being invited to the table and not getting a seat at the table, and we never hear people really talk about what is it that you bring to the table. Mm, true indeed. Yes, indeed. I appreciate that because it's oh, let's talk about that too because you know that's a that's a pivot. It's funny because when we look at these words, we think one is disastrous, and we think the other one is just, it's got so much strength to it, but they mean the same thing. And it's detour and pivot, and not exactly the same thing, but a detour is nothing but a pivot in the direction that you were going. And so we put that negative connotation with a detour and oh my goodness, I got to take a detour and I got to do this and it's like okay, well maybe the detour is going to lead you to a neighborhood you've never been in and maybe you'll buy a property there or maybe you'll go and almost hit a dog and then you fall in love with the owner. I mean, there could be any number. hopefully. For those of you tuning in, hey, 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 guys, welcome, welcome. I appreciate you being a part of the conversation today. This is the Unmuted Intelligence Podcast. I'm super excited to have my guest, Glen, on today. And his book, Bridging the Gap, is down in the carousel. I featured it for you guys. And we were talking about, just what it meant to bridge the gap, what that looked like, what that felt like. And even when we think about, uh, bridging the gap between children and great grandparents and things of that nature. What does that all mean for us, especially after we've been through such a traumatic 2 years? Like, we have to realize we've never experienced all of the things that have happened in the last 2 years. We have never experienced to this extent, to this level. It's new. And this is the first time where everybody around the world was experiencing the same thing, to the point where we were all in our homes. We couldn't go anywhere for weeks. Some people are listen, certain countries are still, the borders are still not open. And all of that means that we have to look at, okay, what are the similarities with us and other people? And we don't have to look at the differences as being the determining factor anymore. Oh, and the relationships that we have, guys, are so valuable. I think we can't deny, especially with us having this time frame where we couldn't go see family members, we couldn't see friends, we couldn't come together and just meet up for, chicken and fries or anything like that. Um, Certain relationships became stronger during this time, and other relationships did not last. It was hard. It was hard. And I will say this, all of the parents of the world, you should love on teachers at this point. After having to homeschool kids, I think you should be like, yeah, I think the teachers deserve like gift baskets weekly, just send them a lunch every month or something. I think they deserve that. Uh, because a lot of parents were like, this is not what I signed up for. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely saw that a lot. I have a client who has a caregiving business, and she said she said she was whatever she could do. She could do FaceTime calls. She would do it, but however she could. And she even had a one of her clients that contacted her to sit with their mother because they couldn't come, and it was like it's heartbreaking because you want to it's your family. It's like, no, this is family, we should be able to be together. But then when we thought about, we compared it to the severity of what was going on, it's like, is it more dangerous to go and sit with them, or let me just go ahead and take the high road and find other means? So yeah, you did see a lot of people that started a whole lot of online things to do for seniors. I did see that a couple companies that started up. And then I also saw, yeah, a lot of people were doing Zoom. We saw the gentleman that couldn't take the cat filter off. And I will say this, Glenn, Zoom caught a lot of people off guard. I've been using Zoom for maybe about 6 years now, but it caught a lot of people off guard. And I was actually in a meeting, and the woman was on the meeting, her camera was on, but I think she had it where she could only see the presenter, she couldn't see herself. And her husband walked behind her butt naked. Then I had tears in my eyes. Everybody's trying to like message her in the chat, and they're trying to get a hold of her. And he walked by. I guess he did something at the window and then came back by. And we were like, oh my goodness. So yeah, it definitely it gave a new perspective and experience. For I said, wow, we are definitely well, this has been an experience for sure. For those of you coming in, I appreciate you guys. Those who have already came in and came back, thank you for sharing it out. Thank you for being a part of the conversation, y'all. Bridging the Gap. You definitely want to go ahead and purchase that book. Glenn, also let them know how they can reach out to you and connect with you if they're interested in anything else that you may be doing. Most definitely. I love this conversation because again, this has been this is where the conversation needs to be. This is where the conversation should be when it comes to us healing and being able to take things to the next level. And you can't be scared of the conversation. I think when you read this book, that's going to be one of the things that you realize is that if it's your family, if it's the job, if it's the church, if it's the community, whatever, you can't be scared to have these conversations anymore. Mhm. one ripple at a time. I love it. Speak Easy audience, unmuted intelligence audience, thank you so much for being a part of this very first episode. Thank you so much, Glenn, for your yes. Glen Williams, Bridging the Gap, an inside look at communications and relationships after traumatic events. So, guys, you're definitely going to want to go ahead, check this book out. He describes how he built walls to protect himself, stopped communicating, and how this led to 2 divorces. Glenn then talks about how he relearned to open up, communicate openly, and develop the good relationship he now lives in. Bridging the Gap gives way to deal with and reduce stress and ways to take traumatic events and it rephrase them so they can be shared safely, thus bridging the gap in communication that has been created. And of course, Glenn left us with the powerful words that listen, start with your home, start with your family, start with those who are closest to you when it comes to bridging the gap, because it will definitely overflow into everything else. With that being said, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this particular episode number 1. You guys have a great one. And until next time, don't forget to press it out. See ya.